Hello and welcome back to another episode of the EMS Handoff Podcast. It's David and Bradley, and we are joined this time remotely. We're live. Our guest is coming to us from another location, but we're still at the Tennessee EMS Education Association annual conference. But we have on our screen with us David Givot, who has a new book out. So, David, tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you to the EMS profession and where you are now.
Oh, wow. Well, that's if I did that, nobody would read the book. No, it's fun. I became an EMT in about 1987, became a paramedic in 89, spent about a decade running calls in the field, worked my way up and out, became a consultant for a while, ran an ambulance company back east for a while, came back to California, went to law school, and now I have my law practice is primarily centered around defending and protecting EMS providers, whether it's in court, when they get in trouble, or administratively if their license is in trouble. But more than that, I travel around the country and I speak to large groups of EMS providers to give them the tools and teach them about the law and prevent entanglements to begin with, like to keep trouble from happening at all. That's sort of where I am now in my 30 plus years of this.
So before we go too far, so before your episode here, we actually had Steve Worth here. He was actually presenting at the conference, and so we got him a couple of times. And he said he bought your book and he's going to want an autograph soon. So we'll connect you to him, make sure he gets that from you.
I'm just afraid he'll send it back with like red marks in it, corrections.
D- resubmit.
Right, exactly. No, believe me, the guy's a legend, and then here I am, and that's yeah, cool. Maybe sweat a little bit.
I've ordered the book, but it has not shown up yet. And I was turned on to your book by Wes. So
sure.
Wes is the one that said, "Hey, you really need to read this book."
All right.
Cool.
So you decided to
pretty excited about the attention that it's getting. I think it's not what I expected.
So going from an EMS career to a successful law practice, first off, what made you decide to write a book?
I wasn't reaching enough people, I don't think. I wanted to really be able to get this information out to as many people as possible in a format that was, as easy as possible. I love getting out there, and I love speaking, and I love talking to large groups. But a couple hundred here, or 50 there, or 30 there is not the same reach as I can get with a book that gives the information that I think providers need, because they didn't get it in school and nobody bothered to tell them, and I certainly didn't know when I was practicing in the field. And something they can have in their hand to refer back to as they need to. It actually started with a couple times a year I teach at the University of North Carolina. I do a full day boot camp for them. And one year I decided, I recorded it and had the recording transcribed, and that became sort of the outline, the skeleton of it. And that was like 6 years ago. That's been a long process.
Yeah, because you go down to the leadership there in Charlotte, right?
Correct.
Or you do
yes.
The Chapel Hill.
Yep.
So
Charlotte at UNCC.
Okay, that's one that Carrie runs.
Yes, one of my favorite people. Yeah. And
all right, so Sirens, Lights, and Lawyers.
I'm there every year. Sorry, go ahead.
Sirens, Lights, and Lawyers. Tell us a little bit about, while leaving yourself enough room for people to buy your book, tell us a little bit about what's actually in there.
So I set out to answer a lot of questions that providers didn't even know they should ask. So we're talking about negligence, we're talking about battery, we're talking about kidnapping, we're talking about all of the things that that providers need to be aware of. But more than that, we're getting into the actual law, how it works, how it functions, how it applies to them, how it is both the sword and the shield. And ultimately, when they finish reading it, they'll figure out that Whether the law is the sword, that kills them or the shield that protects them is completely up to them. And the only time they're ever going to have control over how the law applies is on the call, on scene, and certainly within their documentation. There's a whole section on documentation. And I go beyond the law to a more human side, right? We talk about mental health as a very serious issue. Talk about how to deal, how to handle yourself in court, what to say, what not to say, when to say it, when not to say it. And, I'll probably get kicked out of the union, but I talk a lot about how to defeat lawyers, how not to be afraid of them, how not to let them get the best of you. It's kind of all encompassing. I do a lot about leadership too. There's a bunch of stuff about leadership. I think at the end of the book, anybody who reads it is going to have a better sense of who they are as a provider and how they can improve what service they provide to the community and to the patients. I think it was.
So let's go into negligence itself. I love that, and I'm ready to go get the book next. It's see, you got a couple little sitting back there, so people need to make sure put it on their shelf. But let's talk about negligence in itself.
I'm not above it. I'm absolutely not above
it. So a lot of people, look at negligence, but with law changing kind of these days, what are some key things that you see failures within the provider side for not intentionally meaning to be negligent, but we're seeing that occur?
I think the most dangerous place where we see this is in the area of refusals, AMAs, patient refusals, because look, as it has been since the dawn of EMS, so some providers just don't want to be on the call to begin with. And when a patient says, hey, I don't want to go, to them, that's their golden ticket. And then they just peace out. Well, as as anybody who, follows you or, is in the EMS knows that is where the danger starts. That's where the bad things start to happen. And as far as breach of duty, which is the center of negligence, providers who fail to do all of the things that policy and protocol and procedure require before they part ways with a patient is where they find themselves in the deepest and biggest trouble.
So you mentioned, I like how you use the breach of duty there. And a lot of people take that to mean that I have a responsibility to take this patient. And my example is somebody calls 911. I don't want to say Bradley calls 911 because I'm not acting right. And when the ambulance gets there, they've been told that they think I'm having a stroke or having something that's wrong. And I refuse to go to the hospital. And they say, well, we're here, you have to go. But what laws protect? And like you said, sword. Yeah, I see you shaking your head. As you mentioned, the sword and shield.
Why don't you
there.
just throw the most dangerous situation you can out there?
What authority do you have, or what have we kind of gotten a misconception that we may have authority where we don't?
So I think in the scenario that you just offered up, the idea is, number one, first and foremost, as it always is, to err on the side of the patient, right? And the typical example is oh, they're just drunk, right? Well, as we all know, a drunk is not always a drunk. And if the provider is acting in good faith and acting in the best interest of the patient and acting reasonably, I don't think they're going to find themselves in too much hot water for transporting someone against their will if it is in their best interest, right? The problem comes up is when providers go beyond that and say, we're here, so you have to come with us. Like it's either us or go to jail when the police are on scene. You can go to jail, you go to the hospital, which is not a real choice. And so I think that when providers overstep just so they can be done with the call, that's when they find, that's when overstepping becomes problematic for them.
So take that to your third part that you mentioned in the book. A lot of that boils down to what you put in your documentation.
Correct.
Right. So what are some key pitfalls do we see when documenting situations like this?
For ages, the sentiment has been passed down from one provider to the other that less is more, right? There's this misconception that if they write less in their documentation, there's less for them to get called out on or get in trouble for. Nothing could be farther from the truth. That is absurd to me, right? More is more, less is less. That's why they call it more and call it less. I think that the more detailed and specific your documentation is about what you did, what you said, what they said, even to a certain extent, why you did it and why you said it, that's where the insurance is going to be. I talk about this in my book, and I talk about this in front of audiences, is that one of the objects of the game when it comes to documentation of any kind of call is to answer the questions before anybody else has a chance to ask them, right? Imagine, and I'm not to be a fear mongering, but imagine every run report you write is going to be not just go to the hospital or go to QI, but go to a lawyer to assess it, right? And that lawyer is going to have questions. If you answer those questions in your narrative before the lawyer has a chance to ask them, you're going to be that much more ahead of the game, that much safer when it comes down to it. Because in a real situation, when there is a complaint, when there is an investigation, the more detailed, the more specific you can have in your narrative, the safer and the better off you're going to be. If for nothing else, it'll help refresh your recollection, which is the other really important thing about documentation. Sure, it's, continuity of care. Sure, it is for QI purposes. Sure, it is to answer lawyers' questions. But in court, and forgive me if I'm going too long on this, in court, you can't testify from your documentation. And if you don't have a clear independent recollection of what happened, and your report doesn't refresh that recollection, well, that's when we get the old maxim: if you didn't write it, you didn't do it. So, the third component of documentation is to help you remember the call so you can talk about it and answer questions about it.
The other part that you mentioned that you deal with quite a bit from your firm there is, now we'll say Bradley has done something wrong and found himself in front of either the state regulatory board or a criminal case. So you kind of briefly talked about that, about how the documentation comes in, but let's kind of prep some individuals, because there's a lot of people that don't understand why they need legal representation, even going in front of a regulatory board. So why would you advocate, and is it in your book as well, why is a lawyer important if you're going in front of these adjudication processes?
Administrative actions, disciplinary actions, certainly criminal court actions, these are all very foreign environments to people that aren't accustomed to be there. Just like when you arrive on a scene of a call and the family is going off on some absurd thing that has nothing to do with anything because they get their information about EMS from movies and television, that's where your expertise, that's where the EMS provider's expertise comes in. In the administrative investigation, certainly in the hearings and certainly in criminal court, it's essential, I think, whether it's me or somebody else, to have someone help navigate you through that so that you don't make any unnecessary, unforced errors. Chief among them, especially in the investigation portion, is that if a government agency isn't doing an investigation and asking questions, if any of those answers to any of those questions could potentially lead to some criminal entanglement, well, the Fifth Amendment applies. You've got the absolute right to remain silent, and you've got the Sixth Amendment right to counsel present before you answer any questions. And I have seen it happen more times than I care to remember, where a simple, innocuous answer to a seemingly stupid question ends up getting twisted out of context and causing more problems, causing more trouble for the provider that there never should have been to begin with. A lawyer, an expert in that arena, is someone who can help make sure that doesn't happen and guide them through to keep it, clean and smooth, right? The object isn't to get bad or dangerous or negligent providers out of trouble. As I tell people quite often, I don't defend what people did, but I do defend, and lawyers do defend, your rights to be treated fairly in every part of the process. And that is, I think, the chief, most important reason why you want to have a lawyer on your side.
I'm going to ask this, and this puts you in a little bit of a position to advocate for yourself. But so, Bradley works for XYZ ambulance service, and they get notice of charges or something against him. And, XYZ ambulance service provides Bradley a counsel. Is Bradley able, or should Bradley acquire his own independent counsel as well?
So I tell people that if anybody ever provides a lawyer for you, to ask that lawyer one question. And the question is, do we enjoy attorney-client privilege? And if the answer is yes, then great, that's your lawyer. But if the answer is no, because that lawyer actually works for the agency or the county or for somebody else, then absolutely get your own lawyer. You need someone that's going to have your best interest. If somebody else is the client, then when it becomes expedient, you're going to get tossed under the bus.
Yeah. So to add to that, so there are not very many, EMS specific lawyers that are out there.
Isn't that great?
So yeah. so if you get your own lawyer, turn around and have that lawyer to consult with somebody like you, that way they're getting that kind of expert position from another attorney who specializes in that, because you're not licensed in North Carolina, though, are you?
No, just California only. I can provide information and education outside of the state, but I can't represent anyone or give legal advice outside of California.
Right. So if I needed a lawyer in North Carolina, then I would certainly say, hey, can we pick up the phone and call David and see what it would cost to get him to, consult with you on this case?
And for you, I'd give him a good price.
Well, we've already indicted him through all this, so he may.
You're having a bad day today, for sure.
So I'm picking on Bradley a little bit. So on the last episode with Steve, I had to get up and take off, and supposedly they did all this stuff that I was being harassed by the cops and stuff like that. So anyway, going back, that's given us a whole lot of evidence, a whole lot about kind of the process. Give everybody an idea of where they can go to purchase your book, or get more information if they wanted to acquire you to come out and do a training class for them.
It's easy. First of all, the book is on Amazon. It's actually, with all humility, I think it's still among the best sellers. So I can say now I'm a best-selling author, for whatever that's worth. But they can find it on Amazon. Any retailer, any book retailer, anywhere, they can find it. As far as getting to me, it's very easy. They can call me, and I'll give you my cell phone number now. I don't care. 310-699-0070. Everybody in the world has that number. They can find me at thelegalguardian.com or davidgivot.com. I'm very easy to find, and I'm very easy to have come out and speak to your groups.
Well, we'll give you an opportunity here to just kind of give us the last thoughts. What, if there was a provider out there listening that needed your advice today, what would be the thing you say, hey, this is my thought to you?
I have two general thoughts all the time. Number one, on every call, treat it as if it's the most important, most righteous, most critical call you've ever been on, until you prove objectively otherwise, and then go for it as you need to. The second thing that I pretty much tell everybody is that if you are brought in or become subject to any kind of investigation, shut the hell up and call a lawyer before you talk to anybody. Even the most innocent, innocuous, simplest answers to dumb questions could end you up in more trouble than you need to be. So those would be my two biggest pieces of advice that I give to anybody.
I gave you the last. I told you I was giving you the last wrap up, but a question: they don't have to officially give you Miranda before they start collecting your words from.
No, Miranda only applies if you're in custody. That's why at DUI stops, for example, the cops will get all the information, all the questions answered before they place you under arrest, and then it's game over. Yeah, Miranda, you have the right to remain silent. They just don't have to tell you about it unless you're in custody.
So I put that there because not a lot of people think they're like they have to tell me that and then they can collect anything I say, but they're ready to start collecting on you the moment they start talking to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of myths out there, a lot of them.
All right, well, make sure to go out and get David's book and find out a little bit more about your rights, what you didn't learn in class about the legal system and how it affects EMS. And if you get in any trouble, you've got David's number now. He can't come unless you're in California, but you can definitely get a consult from them. Make sure they're representing you well. So, we thank you very much for coming on.
Remember the time difference when you're calling. Remember the time difference.
So I was like, yeah.
So when you're getting off shift at 6 or 7 in the morning, don't call him.
No, please. No, thank you. But no.
All right. Well, we thank you for coming on and we appreciate it. To all the listeners out there, we've got a couple more episodes coming up as we'll be back for day 3 of the conference tomorrow. But in the meantime, always remember the value of your EMS handoff.
Thanks, fellas. Be amazing.